trying to brute force Armored Core 6 under the Souls-like category is a fool's errand. Fact is though, Armored Core 6 doesn't make a very strong first impression. It is slow, it is disjointed, it is uneven. Its combat is not as immediately satisfying as other From titles. Its visuals are a lot more one-note and its spectacle more muted. While they also lack the impact that From Souls-like titles have never struggled to elicit. I'll be frank, 4 hours deep, Armored Core is a pretty bland looking game.
What's up everybody? In today's video we'll be taking a look at the most questionable Armored Core preview video I have seen. It is coming from SkillUp, and what's really weird about this video is that the reviewer gives a huge disclaimer saying that this is not a Souls-like and we shouldn't compare it to a Souls-like, but then he proceeds to compare it to the Souls series for a straight 20 minutes. So it's rather peculiar to say the least. Let's get into it.
After 4 hours with Armored Core, two things stand out to me. Number one, this is not a Souls-like. That point may be eye-rollingly obvious to many of you, but there's been no small amount of discourse out there with people using brief gameplay clips to argue that Armored Core and Dark Souls are more alike than they are dissimilar. That's just not true, at least not from my experience. While these games do share some similarities such as deep RPG customization, challenging boss encounters, and precisely tuned encounter design, the structure, tone, and core gameplay loop of Armored Core 6 are all totally distinct from what From Souls-like games aim to deliver.
So get this, he says the structure, the tone, and the gameplay loop are distinct compared to the Souls genre, and it should not be compared. But yet again, this is what he's going to do throughout most of the video.
Because trying to brute force Armored Core 6 under the Souls-like category is a fool's errand. Secondly, what's also clear to me is that unlike Souls-like games, Armored Core 6 is a slow burn. You can play just a few minutes of even Dark Souls 2 and immediately be drawn in by its world, its monsters, the items you might discover, and so much more. Armored Core 6 is not like that. Some 4 hours in, much of it has felt slow, disjointed, at times frustrating, and very often uneven. Some of the early missions are so short and so underwhelming that I was left thinking, man, that mission really could have been an email.
So one of his complaints is that the missions sometimes are too easy and too short, but I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Nioh series, but I found it really interesting how you have the main missions and then you have sub-missions that might take you 5 to 10 minutes to finish. Sometimes it's just one fight, and I find that it brings a nice variety to the pace. You don't have to go into 40-minute long missions every single time. And keep in mind that this is chapter 1, where you're supposed to learn the ropes and try to assimilate the controls and try to understand how the game works. If the reviewer did a little bit of research, he would have learned that From Software said that the onboarding with this game is going to be very user-friendly so that all the new players get to try out their mechs and really get a feel for the game before the challenge comes in.
While these visuals certainly sell the premise of a broken world, they also lack the impact that From Souls-like titles have never struggled to elicit. I'll be frank, 4 hours deep, Armored Core is a pretty bland looking game. Its levels are functionally interesting in their layouts and their scenario design, but few of them have much visual flair to accompany that design flair. The factory spaces in particular feel very dull, like the environments of Nier Automata, a game some 6 years old which even back then was panned for its uninspired environments. Whether it's indoor factories, outdoor urban space, snowy tundra or whatever, it all just looks a little, bland.
So once again, he's not listening to his own advice and he's comparing Armored Core to the Souls series when it comes to environment and tone. Of course it's bland. It's a desolated planet that has been demolished, destroyed by a cataclysmic event. There won't be a beautiful Erdtree or some nice castles. It is completely decimated. So why would you expect it to stand out? It's supposed to look like that. At the same time, there's something that this reviewer fails to understand is, you know, when you're playing something like The Last of Us and you're exploring for maybe 20-25 minutes sometimes, and then an encounter pops up and you'll have 5 to 10 minutes of combat. Then you go back to another 20 minutes of exploring. It is very mixed in terms of combat and exploring. In this game, It's exclusively combat. You're not going to spend any time looking at nooks and crannies. So there's no reason for the environment to pop out with these beautiful landscapes because you should be focused on the mission.
There's certainly reason to be hopeful that this changes later in the game, as From's art team are unquestionably one of the best in the business. But from the Undead Burg to Majula to the Cathedral Ward to Limgrave, From Games have never struggled to make a strong first impression, and it's a little curious that after some 4 hours with Armored Core, I really can't think of any unique space that stands out as being particularly memorable for its visual design. Trying to brute force Armored Core 6 under the Souls-like category is a fool's errand. Separate from art design, it's clear that Armored Core isn't pushing the envelope when it comes to the more technical visual elements.
Okay, so he's saying that Armored Core 6 is not pushing the envelope when it comes to the technical elements, but yet Armored Core 6 will be the first From Software games to have 120 frames per second on PC. And that's literally what I would call pushing the envelope of the technical elements.
Now, I was playing this on a top-of-the-line PC at max settings, and even then textures and lighting looked a little flat and low res, shadows and ground clutter are fairly minimal, terrain detail is very low, there's just not a lot of depth to what you're seeing. It's as though From have pulled a lot of the detail out to get it running on PS4 and Xbox One, and also keep the action smooth. So is it smooth? Basically yes, but like I said, this was a top-of-the-line PC, and even then I did notice the odd frame drop here and there. From Games have typically been a bit wonky with their day one technical performance. Elden Ring was a perfect example of that. So personally, I'm looking forward to doing some more detailed testing across some different PCs to see how well this runs come launch.
On that note, he does have a point. It's true that at launch, most From Software games have some graphical issues and frame rate issues, but that usually gets fixed very quickly.
The cleverness of the mission and scenario design is important because the combat is not as mechanically demanding or satisfying as it is in From Souls-like titles. Firstly, the difficulty equation here is very different. Most enemies you'll encounter, at least in the first 4 hours, are largely fodder and pose very little threat. In fact, I'd argue that 95% of the enemies you'll face in those opening hours fall into that category, with the challenge only kicking in against named Armored Core enemies and bosses. Taking down a lowly skeleton in Dark Souls can be a very tense duel if the circumstances line up just right. I never found anything close to that here, since FromSoft are clearly pushing a different power fantasy. They want you to feel strong and fast and in control, and they want your Armored Core mech to be a dangerous threat that instills fear in the hearts of your enemies. It's a confronting shift for Souls-like fans.
So he's saying that the combat is not demanding enough, it's pretty easy and most of the enemies are very easy. But if he did a little bit more research, he would have learned that From Software said that the first chapter would be onboarding. It's kind of like a very long tutorial to teach you how to use the mech. Armored Core is going to be 50 to 60 hours long, and I'm sure that if you want to do the endgame content, the very hard missions, this reviewer will have to learn the very basic combat that he's talking about.
I really love seeing From do this after experiencing more than a decade of the exact opposite. Part of your lethality comes from the various target-assisted weapons you're able to equip. There are all manner of missile batteries, automatic weapons, laser cannons, and melee weapons, all of which are driven by lock-ons, meaning that you can sort of fire and forget, picking in and out of cover in time with your weapon cooldowns. There are also plenty of manually targeted weapons, but the initial arsenal definitely favors auto-targeting, which, while effective and easy to use, is a lot less satisfying than having to manually point and fire. For those reasons, I found Armored Core to be a pretty easy game, at least in those opening hours. The combination of me feeling powerful, enemies feeling weak, and weapons doing a lot of the work for me meant that I could progress through most of the missions without much difficulty. However, that all changed when I met this arsehole. This was the first proper boss, and he absolutely dumpstered me over and over again until I finally got him down. It was an encounter that had all the hallmarks of a classic FromSoft Souls-like encounter, and if there's any one part of the game that felt closest to FromSoft's recent output, it's absolutely these boss encounters. At the top of this preview, I said that I wasn't sure that I liked Armored Core yet, and I want to circle back to that point because I'm sure that that sentence stood out like, what? You don't immediately love a FromSoft game? What the hell's the matter with you? Fact is though, Armored Core 6 doesn't make a very strong first impression. It is slow, it is disjointed, it is uneven. Its combat is not as immediately satisfying as other From titles. Its visuals are a lot more one note and its spectacle more muted. I could lie to you and say, oh my god, this is absolutely incredible. But to be honest, it wasn't. It felt a lot like setup, slowly working towards something bigger, more elaborate, and more impressive. The things that I was hoping for, I am seeing them, but they're coming in really slowly. Like I said in the title, Fires of Rubicon is a slow burn, one that's comfortable taking its time to build out its world, systems, and story.
So yeah, that's pretty much it for the review. He had some good points here and there, but otherwise it was a very strange review. He made a big deal about not placing this in the Souls-like category, not comparing it to Souls-likes, but yet he spent most of the time doing exactly that. Very, very strange indeed. Anyways, that's it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. It would mean a lot, and I'll see you guys on the next one.